The seventh specialist failed on a Tuesday. Garrett Nolan knew it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were when he swapped the filtration pads on the air recyclers in the east wing of the Verassi Royal Conservatory. And he had just finished dragging a 40-pound filter cartridge across the polished quartz floor when the doors to the high-resonance chamber burst open, and a woman in a silver medical gown stumbled out, her face the color of ash. Behind her came two royal guards, their pale lavender hands resting on the ceremonial blades at their hips. Behind them came the sound that everyone in the conservatory had learned to dread over the past 6 weeks, a low, a rhythmic keening, like metal bending inside a living throat. Prince Savrin was having another episode. Garrett stepped to the wall, pressing his back flat against the marble as the procession swept past. The specialist did not look at him. The guards did not look at him. The conservatory's chief administrator, a tall Verassi woman named Counselor Davin, came striding around the corner with her robes billowing, and she did not look at him either. Her luminous violet eyes were fixed on the specialist. "You lasted 4 hours," Davin said. Her voice carried the precise, clipped cadence of a woman who had been managing disappointment professionally for 6 consecutive weeks. "Your predecessor lasted 6. The specialist stopped walking. She turned. Her medical instruments jangled against the case slung over her shoulder, and Garrett noticed that her hands were trembling. Not from exhaustion, from something closer to fear. "The prince's neural architecture has been fractured beyond any harmonic restoration I can offer. Whatever happened to that child was not an illness, counselor. It was a severing, and I do not say this lightly. There is no specialist in the Verassi dominion who can repair a severing. You could summon 100 more of us, and everyone would leave the same way I am leaving." Davin's expression did not change. Her pale blue skin caught the hallway light like polished stone, and the faint bioluminescent markings along her temples pulsed once, dimly. It was the only sign of distress Garrett had ever seen her give in nearly a year. "Thank you for your time," Davin said. The specialist left. The guards escorted her through the crystal-vaulted atrium and past the ceremonial fountains whose water ran in spirals rather than streams, and Garrett watched until the doors sealed behind her. The keening from the chamber continued, muffled but constant, pressing through 3 sets of sealed doors like something alive trying to find its way out. Davin stood alone in the corridor with her hands clasped behind her back and her chin raised and her eyes closed, as though she were counting to some number that would make the sound bearable. The bioluminescent lines along her jaw pulsed faintly, 3 times, 4 times, each pulse dimmer than the last. Then she opened her eyes and walked away, and Garrett went back to his filter cartridge. He had been the janitor at the Royal Conservatory for 11 months. The posting was quiet, well paid by human labor standards, and comfortably invisible. The Verassi were a refined species. Their cities were lattices of crystal and engineered light. Their architecture responded to sound the way other species' architecture responded to gravity, by working with it rather than against it. Their music could restructure molecular bonds. Their royal bloodline carried a neurological gift called resonance, a capacity to harmonize with the vibrational architecture of living things, which meant they could heal tissue, calm storms in the nervous systems of other beings, and in the case of the very gifted, reshape the growth patterns of plants and coral with a sustained note. Prince Savrin was 7 years old, and he had been the most gifted resonant in 4 generations, until 6 weeks ago, when something broke inside him during a training session, and his gift turned inward and began consuming its own signal. The specialists called it a fracture loop. The keening was the sound of a child's nervous system trying to tune itself to a frequency that no longer existed, searching endlessly for a harmonic anchor it could not find. 7 specialists had come. 7 had failed. The first had been a resonance therapist from the Central Conservatory on Verassi Prime, a confident woman with 60 years of clinical experience who had spent 3 days in the chamber and emerged looking as though she had aged 10 more. The third had brought a team of 4 assistants and a harmonic amplification rig that filled half the chamber and produced sounds that made the crystal walls crack in places. Garrett had to repair the following morning. The fifth had been a Zeno specialist from the Lullaby Institute, the first non-Verassi to attempt treatment, who had lasted 2 hours before declaring the case neurologically unprecedented and departing on the next transport. Each one more decorated than the last, each one arriving with elaborate harmonic equipment and confident assessments, each one leaving quieter than they had arrived. Garrett knew all of this because janitors heard everything. He cleaned the rooms where the specialists consulted. He emptied the waste receptacles outside the high-resonance chamber. He mopped the corridor where Davin paced at night when the keening grew loud enough to carry through 3 sets of sealed doors. He repaired the crystal cracks and polished the scuff marks left by medical equipment that was too heavy for floors designed for bare feet and whispered hymns. He was furniture. He was air. He was the human they had hired to do the work that was beneath even the lowest Verassi servant, because human hands were strong and human backs were durable, and humans did not complain about the jobs that no one else wanted. He did not mind. The work was honest. The conservatory was beautiful, with its crystal corridors that caught light and bent it into soft spectrums along the walls, and its gardens where coral trees grew in spirals of white and pale gold, and its ceilings that resonated faintly with whatever music had last been played beneath them. Garrett Nolan had spent enough years in places far less beautiful to appreciate what he had. The keening grew worse over the next 3 days. Garrett heard it while he cleaned the resonance rehearsal rooms on the 3rd floor, where the practice crystals stood in rows like silent instruments. He heard it while he polished the crystal balustrades overlooking the central atrium, where the sunlight came through the dome in long shafts that made the dust motes glow like embers. He heard it while he ate his lunch alone in the maintenance closet on the ground floor, a small room with a metal bench and a rack of cleaning supplies and a window that looked out onto the palace gardens. The sound had a quality that worked its way under the skin. Not painful exactly, more like a persistent wrongness, the sonic equivalent of watching someone walk with a broken leg, the body trying to perform a function it no longer could. On Thursday evening, an 8th specialist arrived. This one was military, a resonance officer from the Verassi Fleet Medical Corps, a tall man with silver-gray skin and the clipped efficiency of someone accustomed to battlefield triage. Garrett was mopping the corridor outside the administrative offices when the officer passed, flanked by 2 aides carrying a case of equipment that hummed with its own contained frequency. The officer lasted 90 minutes. When he emerged, his face was drawn tight and his hands were rigid at his sides, and he walked past Garrett without a word and without stopping until he reached Davin's office, where he closed the door behind him, and his voice, muffled but audible to a janitor who happened to be mopping very slowly nearby, said, "That child is dying, counselor. The loop is consuming his baseline. If we cannot find an external anchor within the next 14 days, he will lose the resonance permanently, and the process of losing it will be," he paused, "severe." The door opened a few minutes later. The officer left. Davin did not come out for a long time. On Friday, Garrett was called to clean the high-resonance chamber itself. This had happened twice before. The chamber was circular, 30 meters across, walled in a living crystal that amplified sound into structured harmonic fields. The crystal was not like ordinary mineral. It grew slowly, responding to the vibrations it absorbed, and over time it developed patterns that reflected the chamber's acoustic history, the way tree rings reflected a forest's weather. When a specialist worked with Prince Savrin, the crystal absorbed the session's residual vibrations. The specialist's failed harmonics layered on top of the boy's fractured signal, and needed to be wiped down with a neutralizing solution so the next session could begin clean. The solution was simple: water with a mineral compound dissolved in it, a copper salt mixture that bonded with the crystal's surface and lifted the stored vibrations out. Garrett mixed it himself in the maintenance room, measured with the care of a man who had once measured things that mattered more, carried it in a steel bucket, and applied it to the walls with a broad cloth in slow, even strokes. He let himself into the chamber at 1400 hours, expecting it to be empty. It was not. Prince Savrin sat in the center of the chamber on a low cushion, his knees drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped around his shins. He was small for his age, a fact that his illness had made more pronounced over the past 6 weeks. His skin was the pale silver white of the royal bloodline, and the bioluminescent lines that traced his temples and the backs of his hands flickered erratically, like a signal lamp with a damaged filament, bright then, dim then bright in a rhythm that had no rhythm. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at a point on the far wall that held nothing worth staring at. The keening was coming from him, and up close it was quieter than Garrett had expected, more like a sustained, broken hum than the wailing he had heard through the walls. More intimate. More helpless. The boy was alone. There were supposed to be attendants. The protocol was explicit: 2 trained caretakers at all times, 1 medical, 1 domestic. But the chamber was empty except for the child, and Garrett stood in the doorway with his bucket and cloth and understood, with the weary certainty of a man who had worked in institutional settings long enough, that the attendants had stepped away because the keening wore people down, and even trained professionals needed 10 minutes of silence to keep functioning. He stood there and looked at the child and felt, with a clarity that surprised him, the particular kind of helplessness that comes from recognizing pain you cannot fix. He knew that feeling. He had carried it for a long time. In another life, before the conservatory, before the janitorial contracts, before the quiet years of mopping floors on stations and outposts across 3 systems, Garrett had been someone else. Someone whose hands did more than clean. A repair technician at Callaway Station. A senior mechanic who could diagnose a failing system by the sound it made and rebuild an atmospheric regulator blindfolded, and who was, by every measure that mattered, gifted at making broken things work again. But that was a long time ago, and the man he had been then had made a choice that cost people things he could not give back, and the man he was now cleaned floors and changed filters and did not pretend to be anything more. He set the bucket down. The sound of metal on crystal rang once through the chamber, a clean, bright note that the walls caught and held for half a second before letting go. Savrin's head turned. The keening did not stop, but his eyes focused, briefly, on Garrett. They were large and pale violet, rimmed with a faint luminescence that stuttered in time with the bioluminescent lines on his skin. "I'm the janitor," Garrett said. "I'm here to clean the walls. I didn't know you were in here. I can come back." The boy stared at him. The keening continued, that low, arrhythmic hum that lived somewhere between the boy's throat and his chest. The flickering along his temples intensified for a moment, then subsided, like a radio briefly catching a station before losing it again. "Do you want me to stay or go?" Garrett asked. It was not a question the specialist had asked. Garrett did not know this, but it was true. Every specialist who had entered this chamber had entered with equipment and authority and a treatment plan, and the assumption that the child would cooperate, because children cooperated with experts, because experts knew what they were doing, because the credentials on the wall meant something. No one had asked the 7-year-old prince what he wanted. Savrin's mouth moved. The keening fractured for a half-second into something that was almost a word, a shape of sound that wanted to be language but could not quite get there. Then the loop caught it and pulled it back into the formless hum. Garrett waited. He did not step closer. He did not kneel down to the boy's level with the studied gentleness of a trained caretaker. He stood where he was, holding his cloth, and waited the way a man waits for another person to decide something, without pressure and without performance, and without the expectation that the answer would come quickly. Savrin's hand unclasped from his shin and extended, palm down, fingers spread. It was a Verassi gesture Garrett had seen the servants use. It meant stay. "All right," Garrett said. He picked up his bucket and walked to the nearest wall section and began wiping down the crystal. Slow strokes, top to bottom, wringing the cloth into the bucket between passes. The neutralizing solution smelled faintly of copper and wet stone. The crystal fogged under the cloth and then cleared to a clean, bright surface that caught the chamber's ambient light and threw it in soft arcs across the floor. The stored vibrations from the failed sessions lifted out of the crystal in faint shimmers that dissipated like heat haze, and the wall beneath was clean and warm and ready. Garrett worked. The keening continued. For 10 minutes nothing else happened. The bucket clinked against the floor when he set it down to wring the cloth. The cloth made a soft sound against the crystal. The boy breathed and keened, and the chamber held both sounds with equal fidelity. Then Garrett started humming. He did not do it deliberately. It was a habit, something his hands knew how to prompt when they were doing repetitive work, the way some people whistle or tap their foot. He had hummed while he fixed things, back when fixing things was what he did. He had hummed while he soldered circuit boards on the repair bench at Callaway Station, his fingers finding the connections by feel while the melody kept the rest of his mind loose and quiet. He had hummed while he rebuilt the atmospheric regulators on the mining rig at Dareth 4, the job where he had been responsible for the lives of 216 people, and had failed 47 of them because of a shortcut he took with a pressure coupling that he knew was suspect, and used anyway because he was tired, and the shift was long and he told himself it would hold. It had not held. The coupling had failed at 0300 on a Sunday morning, and the resulting pressure cascade had ruptured the atmospheric seal in sections 7 through 12, and 47 people had been caught in the breach, 17 dead, 30 with injuries ranging from chemical burns to permanent respiratory damage. All because Garrett Nolan had been gifted and lazy and arrogant enough to trust his instinct over the diagnostic readout that told him the coupling needed replacement, not repair. He had served his time. He had been cleared of criminal negligence, technically, because the coupling had been flagged as within tolerance by the station's own automated systems, and the shortcut was one that every senior mechanic on Callaway took as standard practice. The inquiry had distributed blame across the station's maintenance protocols, its automated monitoring, its staffing schedules, and Garrett himself. But the distributed blame did not distribute the weight. Garrett knew what he had done. He knew he had looked at the readout and seen the margin and made the calculation and chosen wrong. And knowing was its own sentence, longer than any a court could impose. So he cleaned floors, and sometimes when his hands were busy and his mind was quiet, he hummed. The tune was nothing. An old earth melody his mother had hummed in the kitchen when he was a boy, something without a name or a composer, more rhythm than melody, a rising and falling pattern that lived in the chest rather than the throat. He hummed it low, under his breath, barely audible over the wet sound of the cloth on crystal. The keening stopped. Garrett did not notice immediately. He was 2/3 of the way around the chamber wall, working a section where the crystal had a faint vein of darker mineral running through it, and his attention was on making sure the solution got into the crevice where the darker mineral met the pale. But the silence registered in his body before his mind caught up, the way silence always registers in a room where noise has been constant, like a pressure change behind the eardrums. His hand paused, he turned. Savrin was looking at him. Not the unfocused, searching gaze the boy had worn since the fracture. This was direct, present. The bioluminescent lines on his temples had stopped flickering and were glowing with a steady, faint warmth, like coals that someone had breathed on and found still alive. The boy's mouth was slightly open, his breathing was even, his hands had unclenched from around his shins. Garrett stood very still. The cloth dripped once into the bucket. The crystal wall behind him held the drip sound and then let it go. "Was that you?" Savrin said. His voice was small and hoarse and cracked from disuse. It was the first coherent sentence anyone in the conservatory had heard him speak in 6 weeks. Garrett looked at the cloth in his hand, then back at the boy. Was what me? The low sound. It was. Savrin's hand came up and touched his own temple, where the bioluminescent line glowed steadily for the first time since the fracture. It fit, like a piece that was missing, and I did not know what shape it was until it was there. Garrett did not understand what that meant. He did not understand harmonic architecture or resonance fractures or the neurological gift of the Verassi royal line. He understood mops and filter cartridges and the particular way that crystal fogged when you wiped it with a copper mineral solution. I was humming, he said. It's just a thing I do while I work. I can stop if it bothers you. No, Savrin said. The word came fast, almost panicked, and the bioluminescent lines on his temples flickered once before steadying again. Don't stop. Please. So Garrett did not stop. He turned back to the wall and continued cleaning and continued humming, the same tuneless melody, his mother's kitchen, the sound of a woman scrubbing pots and humming to no one because the kitchen was warm and the work was simple, and the sound made the silence less empty. Behind him, Savrin's breathing slowed. The bioluminescent glow in the chamber's ambient light shifted from the erratic stutter that had defined the past 6 weeks to something steadier, warmer, the way a room changes when someone closes a window against the cold. The boy's body uncurled degree by degree until he was sitting upright rather than folded into a knot, and his eyes were closed, and the faint hum of the fracture loop was still there underneath, but it was quieter. It had something to lean against. Garrett cleaned the entire chamber. It took 40 minutes. He hummed for all of it, the same melody looping back on itself, rising and falling, a thing without destination, and when he finished and wrung out the cloth for the last time, Savrin was lying on his side on the cushion with his eyes closed, breathing evenly, the keening entirely absent. The chamber's crystal walls glowed with a soft, undisturbed light that Garrett had never seen them hold before. He picked up his bucket. He looked at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then he left the chamber and closed the door quietly behind him. He did not tell anyone what had happened. He did not know what had happened. He went back to the maintenance closet and washed out his bucket and started on the afternoon's work, which was the third-floor recycler pads, which were overdue. Davin found him 2 hours later. She appeared in the doorway of the second-floor lavatory he was scrubbing, her tall frame filling the frame, her violet eyes unreadable. Behind her stood a woman Garrett did not recognize, shorter, older, wearing a medical gown with the sigil of the Royal Resonance Institute embroidered on the collar in silver thread. "The prince is sleeping," Davin said. Garrett paused, one hand on the scrub brush, one knee on the tile floor. "That's good. He has not slept in 11 days. Every sedative we administered was metabolized by the fracture loop before it could take effect. The loop processes external chemical inputs as threats and accelerates its cycle to counteract them. Every harmonic specialist who attempted to induce rest was repelled by the destabilized field. The prince has not eaten solid food in 4 days. He has not spoken a coherent word in 6 weeks." She paused. The bioluminescent lines on her temples pulsed once. "He is now sleeping." The fracture loop has not ceased, but it has quieted to a level our monitors have not recorded since the initial incident. The attending physician reports that the shift occurred during the 40-minute period you were cleaning the high-resonance chamber. Garrett looked at the scrub brush in his hand. He looked at Davin. "I was cleaning the walls. I hummed a little while I worked. That's all I did." The woman behind Davin stepped forward. "Mr. Nolan, my name is Physician Resident Tesavhi. I am the senior harmonic pathologist at the Royal Resonance Institute. I have analyzed the chamber's acoustic record from this afternoon in considerable detail." She held up a datapad showing a waveform analysis that meant nothing to Garrett. "The melody you produced, while rudimentary in harmonic structure, carried a tonal pattern that happens to intersect with the Verassi neural harmonic baseline at 3 critical frequencies. The 2nd, the 7th, and the 11th partials of your humming voice align with the foundational resonance of the prince's neurological architecture. This is not something you could have known or intended. It is a coincidence of human vocal range and the specific overtone structure of your particular humming pattern. But the effect on the prince's fracture loop was measurable and significant. You provided a temporary harmonic anchor, something the loop could reference as an external stable signal instead of chasing its own feedback. Garrett stood up slowly. His knees ached from the tile. There was cleaning solution on his forearms. "You are asking me if I meant to do it," he said. "I didn't. I was just cleaning." "We are not asking if you meant to do it," Davin said. "We are asking if you can do it again." He went back the next morning. This time the chamber was prepared. Tsavi had set up monitoring equipment around the perimeter, small crystalline nodes on slender stands that recorded the room's harmonic field in real time, each one pulsing with a faint blue light. 2 royal guards stood outside the door, their expressions carefully neutral. Davin herself waited in the observation alcove above the chamber, a windowed gallery that looked down on the circular floor, her hands folded, her luminous markings dim with controlled tension. Savrin was on his cushion. The keening had returned during the night, but it was softer than before, and when Garrett walked in with his bucket and cloth, the boy's eyes found him immediately. Found him the way a compass finds north. "You're the humming man," Savrin said. "I'm the janitor," Garrett said. He set the bucket down. "I'm here to clean the walls again." "They're already clean. You cleaned them yesterday." "Then I'll clean them again. They can always be cleaner." He started at the same wall section, with the same solution, the same slow strokes. The crystal fogged and cleared. The copper mineral smell filled the air. And after a minute, when his hands had found their rhythm and his mind had settled into the work, the hum came, rising from his chest the way it always did, unbidden, the same shapeless melody. His mother's kitchen, the sound of a woman who had worked hard all day, finding a small pocket of peace in the rhythm of her hands, and not needing it to be anything more than what it was. The keening faded. In the observation alcove, Tsavi watched her monitors and saw the fracture loop's amplitude drop by 32% in the first 4 minutes. The prince's bioluminescent markers stabilized. His breathing evened. His hands, which had been clenched white around his shins, relaxed, and color returned to the faint luminous lines on his skin. "Consistent with yesterday's readings," Tsavi murmured to Davin. "The anchor takes hold within the first 3 minutes and strengthens as the session continues. The loop does not fight it. It accepts it the way a dislocated joint accepts realignment." And then something happened that none of them expected. Savrin began to hum. It was faint at first. A child's approximation of the melody, imprecise and wavering, like a young bird testing a call it had heard an adult make. But the chamber's crystal walls caught it and amplified it, and the harmonic field that Tsavi was monitoring shifted from passive reception into active resonance. The prince's fractured gift, the resonance that had turned inward and begun eating its own signal, found the external anchor of Garrett's hum and began, tentatively, to align with it, not imitating it, harmonizing with it, finding a second voice within the first and weaving itself into the spaces between the notes. Tsavi's hand went to her mouth. The readout on her monitor showed the fracture loop contracting, folding inward on itself as the 2 tonal patterns, the janitor's rough hum and the prince's fragile echo, braided together into a crude but functional harmonic pair. "He's tuning to it," Tsavi whispered. "The loop is accepting a paired signal. None of the specialists achieved this. None of them came close." Davin said nothing. She stood in the alcove with her hands clasped and watched the human janitor wipe down crystal walls that did not need cleaning while the prince of the Verassi sang along, and for the first time in 6 weeks, The sound coming from the high-resonance chamber was not a wound. It was a duet, rough and imperfect and unintentional, played on instruments that had no names but a duet. Garrett came back the next day, and the next, and the next after that. His cleaning schedule was quietly rearranged so that his afternoon route always included the high-resonance chamber, and if anyone noticed that the chamber's walls were being cleaned 4 times as often as any other room in the conservatory, no one mentioned it. The schedule change appeared in the maintenance logs as a routine optimization. Davin was thorough about such things. Each session lasted between 30 and 50 minutes. Garrett cleaned and hummed. Savrin listened and then hummed along, and then, gradually, as the days accumulated and the loop weakened and his resonance began to remember its own shape, he began to sing. Not words, not the structured harmonic exercises that the specialists had attempted. Just the melody, or his version of it, with the variations that a 7-year-old's ear naturally introduced, small ornaments and detours and improvisations that the adult ear would not have attempted, but that the child's musical instinct found without effort. On the 4th day, Savrin spoke to him during the cleaning. "What is your name?" "Garrett." "Do you know what you are doing, Garrett?" "Cleaning walls." "You are giving me something to hold on to." All the specialists tried to fix the broken thing. They brought instruments to the broken place and tried to force it together. You are not fixing it. You are just being something that is not broken and letting me hold on to that while the broken thing remembers how to fix itself. Garrett stopped cleaning. He turned and looked at the boy, who was sitting cross-legged now instead of curled into a ball, and whose bioluminescent markings glowed with a warmth that had not been there a week ago, amber instead of the cold, flickering white. "I'm just humming, kid." "I know," Savrin said. "That is what makes it work." The word spread, as words do in a royal court, moving through the conservatory staff in whispers, reaching the administrative offices in careful euphemism, and arriving at the household office in formal language that went to considerable lengths to avoid acknowledging that the most advanced resonance civilization in 3 systems had been outperformed by a man with a mop, and a habit he could not explain. Counselor Davin managed the information with precision. She did not overstate the janitor's role. She did not understate it. She presented the data from Tesav's monitors to the Royal Household Office and let the numbers speak their own language. The fracture loop's amplitude had decreased by 68% over 7 days. The prince was sleeping 6 hours a night. He was eating solid food. He was speaking in complete sentences for the first time in nearly 2 months. The harmonic anchor provided by the janitor's vocal pattern was functioning as a bridge, a crude but stable external reference that the prince's damaged resonance could orient toward while it healed from the inside. "The human is not a specialist," Davin told the household office director. "He is not performing a technique. He is humming while he cleans. The efficacy appears to be incidental to his nature, not to his training." "Then train him to do it more effectively," the director said. "That would destroy the effect. Tesav's analysis is unambiguous. The anchor works because it is organic, unconscious, a byproduct of the worker performing his routine with his full attention on the work. If he is made self-conscious of the tonal pattern, he will alter it. If he starts thinking about what his humming is doing to the prince's neural architecture, it will stop doing it." The director sat with this for a long moment. "Then what do you recommend?" "I recommend that the janitor continue to clean the high-resonance chamber on his current schedule, and that we stop treating his presence as a medical intervention and start treating it as maintenance, which is, from his perspective, exactly what it is." The director approved the recommendation. Garrett was not informed of the deliberation. His pay did not change. His title did not change. He remained the janitor. He cleaned the chamber and hummed, and the prince healed. On the 12th day, the queen came. Garrett had never seen Sovereign Ironshire in person. He had seen her image on the corridor displays, the official portraits that showed a tall Verassi woman with ice-pale skin and silver hair that fell past her shoulders in a way that seemed to catch light even in still images, and the deep violet eyes of the royal line. In person, she was taller than the portraits suggested and quieter, and she moved through the conservatory without an entourage, wearing a simple pale gown of layered crystal thread instead of the formal regalia, her bioluminescent markings barely visible in the afternoon light. She looked like a mother. She looked tired. She came to the observation alcove while Garrett was in the chamber with Savrin. Davin was there. Tessafi was there. Neither of them told Garrett. Below in the chamber, Garrett was cleaning the wall section near the mineral vein, and Savrin was sitting on his cushion humming along, and the two of them were doing what they had done every day for nearly 2 weeks. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that looked like a miracle or a breakthrough or a feat of interspecies harmony. A man cleaning a wall. A child humming along. The mundane act of being present in a room where someone needed you to be present, doing your job while the world sorted itself out around you. "Who is he?" the Queen asked. "His name is Garrett Nolan," Davin said. "He is a human. He has been employed as a janitor at the conservatory for 11 months. His prior employment history includes maintenance and custodial work at various human outposts across 3 systems. He holds no medical credentials, no harmonic training, and no resonance qualifications of any kind. He was a repair technician once," Tessafi added quietly. "A skilled one, very skilled by the records. He left the profession after an accident at a mining station. There were casualties." The Queen looked at her. "He chose not to repair things anymore," Tessafi said. "He chose to clean instead. The records suggest a man who decided that his hands had done enough damage and should be limited to work where a mistake could not kill anyone." The Queen turned back to the window. Below, Garrett wrung out his cloth and moved to the next wall section, and Savrin shifted on his cushion to face the new sound source, the way a flower turns to follow a lamp being carried across a room. "He does not know I am here," the Queen said. "It was not a question." "No, Sovereign." "Good, do not tell him." She watched for 20 minutes. She watched Garrett clean and hum and move around the chamber with the unhurried efficiency of a man doing a job he had done 1,000 times. She watched her son's bioluminescent markings glow with a steadiness they had not held in 2 months. She watched the monitor data that Tessafi showed her. The fracture looped down to 22% of its peak, declining at a rate that exceeded every projection. Then she left, and Garrett finished his cleaning, and Savrin fell asleep, and the janitor carried his bucket out of the chamber and went to clean the second-floor lavatories. And the afternoon continued as though a queen had not stood above him and watched him do the single smallest thing that her entire civilization's brilliance could not replicate. The 15th day was when Garrett learned that the boy knew about the accident. Savrin was not on his cushion when Garrett arrived. He was standing at the chamber wall, running his small fingers along the crystal surface, and the bioluminescent lines on his hands were glowing with a color Garrett had not seen before, a deep, steady amber that pulsed in time with the boy's heartbeat. The keening was gone entirely. The chamber was quiet except for the faint resonance of the crystal itself, a background hum so constant it was easy to forget it was there. "Garrett," the boy said without turning around, "I can hear things in the crystal now. It stores sound. Did you know that?" "I knew it stored vibrations. That's why I clean it. The solution lifts the old ones out so they don't interfere with whatever comes next." "It stores more than vibrations. It stores shapes, emotional shapes. The specialists left fear in the walls, layer after layer of it, and frustration. And the thing where you are trying very hard to be competent and you are not, and you can feel yourself failing, and the trying makes the failing worse." He paused. "You left something too." Garrett set down his bucket. The ring of metal on crystal echoed once. "What did I leave?" "Sadness, a very old sadness and a promise. Savrin turned to face him. His violet eyes were clear and focused, and there was an intelligence in them that went beyond his 7 years, the intelligence of a child whose gift let him hear the emotional weather of every person who entered his room. You promised yourself you would never fix anything again. That is why you clean. You are afraid that if you fix something, you will break something else. You are afraid that your hands are dangerous. The chamber was very quiet. The crystal walls caught the silence and held it the way they held sound, with care and without judgment. The crystal told you that, Garrett said. Yes. Then the crystal knows more about me than most people do. It is not a secret, Garrett. It is in the way you hold the cloth. It is in the way you check the bucket 3 times before you pour. It is in the way you hum, which is the saddest and most careful sound I have heard in my life, because it is the sound of a man who loves the work his hands do and will not let them do the work they love. Savrin walked across the chamber floor, his bare feet soundless on the crystal, and stopped in front of Garrett. He was small enough that the top of his head came to the middle of Garrett's chest. The specialists tried to fix me, Savrin said. They brought tools and instruments and techniques and years of training. Every one of them was an expert, and every one of them was afraid, and I could feel their fear through the resonance, and the fear fed the fracture and made it worse. Each one left more fear in the walls than the last. Do you know why you helped where they could not? Because I hummed. Because you were not trying to fix me. You were just being in the room. You were doing your job, and your job is small and honest, and you do it with your whole self, and that wholeness is what a harmonic anchor is. It is not a technique. It is not an instrument. It is a person being whole in the presence of something broken, and the broken thing feels the wholeness and remembers what it used to be. Garrett looked at the boy. The boy looked up at him. You are not broken, Garrett. You made a mistake and people were hurt, and that is real, and you carry it, and you should carry it because it matters. But carrying it is not the same as being broken. The 47 people you carry, they are part of you now, and the weight of them is what makes your presence so steady. The specialists came in light and confident and empty. You came in heavy and honest. The weight is the anchor. Garrett's throat tightened. He looked away. The crystal walls caught the afternoon light and held it in soft arcs across the floor, and the chamber was warm, and the child's voice was steady, and somewhere outside a maintenance alarm chirped because the third-floor recycler pad needed replacing, and the ordinary world continued its ordinary demands. You should hum now, Savrin said gently. Garrett hummed. The boy hummed with him. The fracture loop, which had been running at 14%, dropped to 11, and then to 8, and the chamber's crystal sang with a warmth that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with 2 people being present in the same room, doing what they could, which was not very much and was exactly enough. On the 21st day, the fracture closed. Tesavi confirmed it at 1600 hours. The loop amplitude had reached 0. The prince's resonance was regenerating at a pace that exceeded every projection, the neural pathways rebuilding themselves with a depth and a stability that suggested not just recovery but genuine growth. The harmonic baseline was not merely restored. It was enriched, carrying a warmth and a groundedness that Tesavi could not account for with her models. When she analyzed the new baseline, she found traces of a non-Verassi tonal signature woven through it, a rough, low-frequency pattern that matched no known harmonic tradition in any species records. It was the humming. The prince had internalized the janitor's melody as part of his own harmonic foundation, the way a broken bone heals around a splint and emerges stronger at the fracture point than it was before the break. The conservatory celebrated quietly. Davin informed the household office. The household office informed the queen. The queen informed no one because she already knew, having watched from the observation alcove every day for the past 9 days without telling anyone, standing at the window with her hands clasped, watching a janitor clean a wall and a boy sing along. Garrett was informed by Davin at the end of his shift, while he was rinsing out his bucket in the maintenance closet. "The prince's fracture has healed," she said. "The loop is at 0. His resonance is regenerating. Your services in the high resonance chamber are no longer medically required." "All right," Garrett said. He was holding a mop. There was cleaning solution on his boots. The maintenance closet smelled of copper and wet stone. "Good. I'm glad he's better. The sovereign wishes to speak with you." Garrett looked down at himself. Work coveralls stained at the knees, calloused hands with cleaning compound under the nails, the faint smell of copper mineral solution. "Like this." She was specific. She said to come as you are. The throne room of the Verassi Royal Conservatory was not the grandest room in the building. That distinction belonged to the Great Resonance Hall, where formal ceremonies were conducted in harmonic chorus. The throne room was smaller, warmer, lined with the same living crystal as the rest of the conservatory, but finished in amber and soft gold tones, so that the light it caught and held had the quality of late afternoon rather than high noon. It was a room built for conversation, not ceremony. Sovereign Ironshaw was standing at the window when Garrett entered. Sovereign was beside her, holding her hand. The boy's bioluminescent markings were glowing with a steady, warm amber, and his face had the healthy color that Garrett had never seen on it before, the silver-white skin flushed with the faintest undertone of rose, the markings bright and rhythmic. There were other people in the room. Davin, standing near the wall with her hands folded. Tesavhi, holding her datapad. 3 members of the household office in formal robes. 2 royal guards at the door, their faces carefully blank. An older Verassi man in the robes of a senior court official, whom Garrett did not recognize but who carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that outlasted him. Garrett walked to the center of the room and stopped. He did not bow, because no one had ever told him the protocol, and he did not pretend to know it. He stood with his hands at his sides, the cloth still draped over his left shoulder because he had forgotten to take it off, and waited. "Mr. Nalan," the Queen said. Her voice was different than he had expected, lower, warmer, without the formal cadence he had heard from other Verassi officials. "My son tells me you are afraid of fixing things." "Yes, ma'am. He tells me this is because you fix things for a living once, and a mistake you made cost lives, and you have spent the years since then making sure you never have the opportunity to make that kind of mistake again. You chose the smallest work you could find. Work where your hands could not hurt anyone." "That's about right. He also tells me something that I think you do not yet believe, which is that the thing you ran from is the same thing that saved him. Your hands fix things, Mr. Nalan. They fix things even when you were telling yourself you were only cleaning. The humming, the steadiness, the way you move through a room with care and attention, that is repair work. It has always been repair work. You did not stop being a fixer. You just found a way to hide it from yourself." Garrett said nothing. The cloth on his shoulder smelled of copper and wet stone. "I have a question for you. 7 specialists came, the finest harmonic practitioners in 3 systems. Each one brought credentials and equipment and technique. Each one failed. You walked into the chamber with a bucket and a cloth and no plan and no ambition and no idea what you were doing, and you did what none of them could. Not because you are more skilled, because you were present, because you were honest, because the weight you carry, the 47 people, the guilt, the years of choosing the smallest work, all of that made you the steadiest thing in the room. And steadiness is what my son needed." She turned from the window. In the warm amber light of the throne room, her ice-pale skin looked almost golden, and her violet eyes held something that was not pity and not gratitude and not admiration, but lived in the territory between all 3, something closer to recognition. One person seeing another clearly. "The question is this. You broke something once and people were hurt, and you have been punishing yourself ever since by refusing to use the gift that you have. You chose work where you could not fail because you decided that the cost of failing was too high for you to risk. But the cost of your hiding is real too. You hid for 5 years. And in those 5 years, how many rooms needed what my son's room needed? How many people needed steadiness and got specialists instead? The room was very quiet. The crystal walls held the silence like a bell holds the echo of its last ring. Garrett looked at the Queen. He looked at Savrin, who was watching him with those clear violet eyes, and a small, knowing expression that no 7-year-old should have been capable of, but that this particular 7-year-old wore with a naturalness that made it impossible to doubt. He looked at the mop-water stain on his left boot. "Ma'am," he said, "with respect, I'm not a specialist. I don't know anything about resonance or harmonic architecture or neural fractures. I'm a janitor. I clean things. That's what I'm qualified to do, and that's what I should probably keep doing." "You are qualified to be present," the Queen said. "You are qualified to be whole in a room where wholeness is needed. Those are not qualifications that can be taught, and they are not qualifications that my civilization's finest could replicate with all their instruments and all their training. I am not asking you to be a specialist, Mr. Nolan. I am asking you to stop hiding." Savrin let go of his mother's hand and walked across the throne room floor. His feet were bare, as they always were. His bioluminescent markings pulsed with that warm amber glow. He stopped in front of Garrett and looked up at him with the directness of a child who has been very sick and is now very well and understands exactly who is responsible for the difference. "You will still clean things," Savrin said. "I still want you to clean the chamber, but while you clean, you will hum. And while you hum, I will learn to anchor myself. And when I have learned, there will be others who need what you gave me. Other fractures. Other children whose resonance has broken and whose specialists have failed. And you will help them, not because you are trying to fix them, but because you are in the room doing your small, honest work, and that is enough. That has always been enough." Garrett looked down at the child. The child looked up at him. The throne room held its breath, the crystal walls warm and patient. "I don't know how to be what you're describing," Garrett said. "You already are what I am describing," Savrin said. "You have been for 21 days. The only thing left is for you to stop pretending you are not." The older Verassi official in formal robes stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carrying the ceremonial weight of a man about to say something that had been carefully drafted and redrafted by committee. "Mr. Nolan, on behalf of the royal household, I am authorized to offer you a formal appointment as resonance custodian of the High Chamber. The role encompasses maintenance of the chamber's physical environment and ancillary harmonic support during the prince's continued training, and should the sovereign approve, consultative presence during the treatment of future resonance fracture cases. The title is new. We created it this morning. It has no precedent because, frankly, you have no precedent." Garrett stood in the throne room of a crystal palace on a world that was not his, in work coveralls stained at the knees, with a cloth on his shoulder and a faint smell of cleaning solution on his hands, and he felt the weight of what was being offered, and the weight of what he had been carrying, and the place where those two weights met, which was the place where a man decides whether guilt is a sentence he serves forever or a debt he has already paid. He looked at Savrin. The boy's violet eyes were steady, patient, not asking, just waiting the way Garrett had waited in the doorway of the chamber on that first Friday, without pressure and without performance. "I'm still going to clean the walls," Garrett said. "I know," the boy said. "And I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of healer or specialist or anything more than what I am. I know. I'm a janitor who hums." "Yes," Savrin said, "and that is enough." Garrett let out a breath he had been holding for 5 years. It was not dramatic. It did not shake his shoulders or mist his eyes. It was the quiet exhalation of a man setting down a weight he had carried so long that he had forgotten his back was bent under it, the small sound of a body remembering what it felt like to stand straight. "All right," he said. The Queen inclined her head. Davin's expression did not change, but the bioluminescent markings along her temples pulsed once, brightly. A warmth Garrett had learned was the Verassi equivalent of a smile that reached all the way in. Tessavi nodded from behind her datapad. The household office representative began entering the appointment into his records. Savrin reached up and took Garrett's hand. The boy's fingers were small and cool, and the bioluminescent lines on his skin pulsed steadily against Garrett's calloused palm, and where the two skins touched there was a faint warmth that was not temperature but something else, something that had no name in any human language but that the Verassi would have called resonance, the vibration of one whole thing recognizing another. Garrett walked out of the throne room holding the prince's hand, his bucket in his other hand, his cloth on his shoulder, and the afternoon light of the conservatory caught the crystal corridors and filled them with soft gold. And behind them, the high resonance chamber hummed quietly to itself, holding the memory of a melody it had learned from a man who had been afraid to do the thing he was best at, and had done it anyway, without trying, because his hands did not know how to stop. The next morning Garrett arrived at the chamber at his usual time. He mixed his solution. He filled his bucket. He let himself in and found Savrin already there, sitting on his cushion, waiting, his bioluminescent markings glowing warm and steady. "Good morning, Garrett," the boy said. "Good morning, kid." Garrett set the bucket down, wrung out the cloth, walked to the wall. He started cleaning, and after a moment he started humming, and the crystals sang.